Believing the school bell is a sound of release is the most dangerous lie ever told. You are taught that its ring signifies freedom, an escape from the cold brick and hollow halls into the warmth of the sun. But the echoes that answer that bell are not always from this side. I have seen the shadows that linger in the empty classrooms, shadows that twist in the shape of forgotten lessons and tragedies that were never recorded in any textbook. They cling to the undersides of desks like dried gum and stain the floorboards with a darkness no bleach can ever remove. The worst mistake you can make is to think those halls are empty when you walk them alone. They are never empty. They are a library of sorrows, a museum of fear, and the final bell is merely a signal for the other students to come out and play. The first vision I will share with you tonight begins not with a scream, but with the jangling of keys, a sound so mundane, yet in the hands of the right or wrong person, it becomes the sound of a lock turning on reality itself. I speak of the old custodian, a man they called Mr. Gideon. He was a creature of the twilight hours, a stooped figure who seemed more shadow than man, his face a roadmap of secrets, etched by time and silence. The students saw him as little more than a fixture, a ghost who cleaned up their daily messes. They never noticed the weight of the iron ring he carried, a collection of keys that sang a discordant song against his hip. Most were for doors they all knew, the library, the gymnasium, the principal's office. But there was one, a key of tarnished, blackened brass, that belonged to no door they had ever seen. It was this key that called to a boy named Leo, a student who collected secrets the way others collected stamps. He was an observer, a haunter of hallways, long after the final bell, fascinated by the school's hidden life. He watched Mr. Gideon for weeks, noting the custodian's ritualistic path, the way he would pause at the end of the East Wing's basement corridor, a place where the air grew still and cold. There, behind a rusted metal grate, was a door that wasn't on any fire map. It was old, wooden, and sealed with a lock that seemed ancient. And it was to this lock that the black brass key was a perfect, silent mate. Leo saw him one night, a silhouette against the dim emergency light, his hand trembling as he inserted the key, but he never turned it. He would just stand there, as if listening to something on the other side, before pulling the key out and shuffling away into the gloom. Leo's obsession became a festering wound in his mind. What was behind that door? What secret did this silent sentinel guard so dutifully, yet so fearfully? He devised a plan, one born of youthful arrogance and a thirst for the forbidden. He managed to make a wax impression of the key one afternoon, when Gideon had left his ring unattended for a fleeting moment. The copy he had made was crude, imperfect, but he felt a cold thrum of energy from it, as if the metal itself understood its purpose. For a week, he waited for the perfect moment, the night of the winter formal, when the school would be a cacophony of music and laughter upstairs, a perfect cover for the silence he needed to break below. He descended into the basement, the distant thump of the bass drum, like a dying heartbeat, guiding him through the labyrinth of pipes and storage rooms. There it was, the door. It seemed darker than he remembered, the wood swollen with a dampness that felt unnatural. The air was heavy, thick, with the smell of wet earth, and something else, something like spoiled meat and forgotten perfume. He took a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs, and slid the copied key into the ancient lock. It resisted at first, scraping and groaning like a bone being set wrong. But then, with a final, desperate push from Leo's trembling hands, it turned. A loud, resonant click echoed down the corridor, a sound that seemed to silence the distant music of the dance entirely. For a moment, Leo felt a wave of triumphant adrenaline. He had breached the fortress. He had uncovered the secret. But as he pushed the heavy door inward, a gust of air washed over him, and it was not the air of a forgotten storage closet. It was the air of a tomb. The space beyond was not a room, but a classroom, one that should not have existed. It was from another era, with desks bolted to the floor in rigid rows, their wooden tops scarred with the ghosts of carved initials from students long dead. A thick layer of gray dust coated everything, a shroud preserving the scene in perfect, deathly stillness. At the front of the class, a chalkboard stood covered in frantic, overlapping scrolls, not of math equations or grammar lessons, but of a single repeating sentence: "I did not let them in." The chalk was worn down to a tiny nub, resting in the tray, as if the writer had been interrupted mid-plea. The silence in here was different. It wasn't empty. It was a weighted silence, the kind that presses in on your ears and slows your heart. It was the silence of held breath, of something waiting. Leo stepped inside, his flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the oppressive dark. He ran his fingers over a dusty desk, the cold of the wood seeping into his skin. He could almost feel the phantom impression of a student sitting there, rigid with fear. Who were they? What happened in this place that it needed to be erased from the school's very architecture? His light fell upon the teacher's desk at the front. It was neater than the rest of the room, save for a single leather-bound class register lying open. He approached it, his footsteps unnervingly loud in the profound quiet. The book was open to a page dated October 31st, 1958. A list of names was written in elegant, looping cursive, that next to each name was a single terrifyingly neat red check mark. All of them. As his eyes scanned the final name on the list, a floorboard creaked directly behind him. Leo froze, his blood turning to ice. The sound was not the old building settling. It was deliberate, the sound of a footstep. He held his breath, listening to the roaring of blood in his ears. He dared not turn around. He could feel a presence, a concentration of the room's cold dread gathering at his back. It was a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the utter absence of warmth, of life. A whisper, thin and dry as autumn leaves, slithered into his ear. A voice that sounded like crumbling paper. "You have the key. Now you stand watch." Leo finally found the courage to spin around, his flashlight beam shaking wildly. There was nothing there, just the empty, silent rows of desks. But he was wrong. Something had changed. The door he had entered through was now closed. He rushed to it, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He fumbled with the old iron handle, turning it, pulling it, ramming his shoulder against the unyielding wood. It was locked. Not just locked. It felt fused shut, as if it had not been opened in a century. Panic, cold and sharp, sank its claws into him. He was trapped in this forgotten classroom, this monument to a silent tragedy. He pounded on the door, his screams for help swallowed by the thick, sound-devouring dust and the oppressive silence of the sealed space. No one could hear him. The party upstairs was a world away. He spent what felt like hours, or perhaps minutes, in a state of primal fear, his rationality crumbling away with each passing second. He tried to think, to find another way out, but there were no windows, no other doors, just the four walls, the chalkboard with its desperate plea, and the rows of empty desks that seemed to be watching him. The cold was getting worse, seeping into his bones. He began to feel a profound exhaustion, a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. It was a draining of his very essence, his vitality being drawn out into the chilled air like steam from a kettle. He slumped down against the locked door, his frantic energy spent, and that's when he noticed it. The dust on the floor wasn't still anymore. It was stirring, forming faint, swirling patterns around the legs of the desks. Listen carefully, because this is crucial. Every building, especially one that has seen generations of life and pain, develops a memory. It holds on to echoes, psychic stains, left behind by moments of intense emotion. A place like a school is a vessel for triumph, boredom, friendship, and cruelty. But when a tragedy is so immense, so terrible, that it is actively buried and forgotten by the living, that memory doesn't just fade, it congeals. It becomes something else. It becomes a conscious absence, a wound in the fabric of the place. The classroom Leo found wasn't just a hidden room. It was the school's scar tissue, a pocket of dead time, where the agony of a single night was trapped on an endless, repeating loop. And by opening the door, Leo hadn't just found a secret, he had woken it up. The dust motes began to coalesce, rising from the floor like smoke. They were not just dust anymore. They were taking on form, shimmering in the weak beam of his dying flashlight. Vague, translucent shapes began to resolve in the empty chairs, the shapes of children, their faces indistinct and blurry, like old, water-damaged photographs. They sat perfectly still, their heads bowed, as if waiting for a lesson to begin. There was no sound, but Leo could feel their collective sorrow, a palpable wave of despair that was suffocating. He understood then the names in the register, the red check marks. They were all here, the entire class of 1958, forever trapped in their final, terrifying lesson. He had not just entered a room, he had stepped into a mass grave. Then, at the front of the classroom, a new figure began to form behind the teacher's desk. It was taller, more solid than the children, its edges sharper, the shape of a woman in a severe, old-fashioned dress. Her features remained a blur of shadow and swirling dust, but the intensity of her presence was overwhelming. The cold in the room dropped dramatically, and Leo could see his own breath misting in the air. The entity raised a spectral hand, and in it, a long, thin ruler appeared. It pointed the ruler at the chalkboard, at the desperate, repeated sentence. Then, the ruler slowly, deliberately, turned and pointed directly at Leo. The whisper came again, but this time it was not just in his ear. It was all around him, seeming to emanate from the very walls. The bell is about to ring. You must not let them in. A low, distant ringing began to sound, a ghostly echo of a school bell from half a century ago. As the sound grew louder, the translucent figures of the children began to stir in their seats. They lifted their heads, and for the first time, Leo could see their faces. Their eyes were wide, dark pits of terror, and their mouths were open in silent screams. They were all staring, not at the teacher, but at the main door, at H's back. Something was on the other side. Something was coming for them, the frantic writing on the board. "I did not let them in" was not a confession. It was a warning, a plea from the teacher who had failed to protect her students, a mantra she was forced to witness for eternity. The door behind Leo began to shudder, a deep, rhythmic booming echoing through the small room. It wasn't someone trying to get him out. It was something trying to get him out. The children shrieked, a soundless psychic wave of pure terror that battered Leo's mind. The teacher entity stood rigid, her form flickering wildly, pointing her ruler at him, her silent command, absolute. You have the key now, you stand watch. He finally understood the custodian's ritual. Mr. Gideon wasn't just a janitor, he was a guardian, a warden. He would come to the door not to open it, but to reinforce its seal, to lend his own life force to the spiritual lock that kept this horror contained. His fear, his vigilance, his daily ritual, it was all that held the entities on both sides of the door at bay. And Leo, in his foolish pride, had broken the seal. The booming on the door grew more violent, the wood splintering, the iron handle rattling as if it would tear loose. The spectral children were cowering under their desks, now their forms dissolving and reforming in panicked bursts. The teacher figure was fading, her energy consumed by the impending breach. Leo was the new guardian. The whisper had been a transference of duty. The key he held was not a tool, but a symbol of his new eternal role. He was now part of the room's memory, the new sentinel who had to stand watch. He pressed his back against the violently shaking door, adding his own meager strength to the fight, his mind shattering under the weight of the silent screams of the dead children and the relentless, monstrous pounding from the other side. He was no longer Leo, the curious student. He was now just the watchman. They never found him. Leo was reported missing, a tragic mystery that haunted the school for a few months before fading into the background noise of teenage life. The winter formal was remembered as the last time anyone saw him alive. They searched the school, of course, every classroom, every closet, every corner of the basement, but they never found the door. To them, the corridor in the east wing simply ended at a solid brick wall. Mr. Gideon, the old custodian, retired abruptly. A week later, a broken man who refused to speak to anyone, his eyes filled with a terrifying, knowing grief. The school kept running, the bells kept ringing, but sometimes late at night, a janitor or a teacher working late would hear a faint sound from the east wing basement, a rhythmic, desperate pounding, and a young man's voice, screaming for a help that would never come. Now I want you to look into the abyss of your own past, into the hallways of the schools you once walked. Can you recall a door that never opened? A corner where the air always felt a little too cold? A story that was whispered but never proven? Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? The veil between a place of learning and a place of eternal suffering is thinner than a page in a textbook. Some lessons are written in chalk, and others are written in dried blood and terror. Leave your mark in the comments below, a testament that you have heard this whisper, that you have understood this warning. Let the others know they are not alone in what they have seen or what they have felt, watching them from the shadows of their own memories. Our next vision is not one of brick and mortar, but of paper and silver nitrate. It deals with the insidious way the past can imprint itself onto an object, creating a doorway for things that have been long forgotten and wish to be remembered. It centers on a yearbook discovered in the dusty attic of the school library, a place the students called the book graveyard. A group of 4 friends, bound by that particular brand of boredom that only afflicts teenagers, found the leather-bound volume from 1978. It was unmarked, unofficial, looking more like a scrapbook than a school-sanctioned publication. They huddled together under a single flickering bulb, the smell of decaying paper filling their lungs as they opened it. It was filled with candid, unposed photos of students they'd never seen, captured in moments of laughter and life. But as they flipped through the yellowed pages, they found her tucked away in the section for the science club was a photograph of a girl who didn't belong. Unlike the other grainy, candid shots, hers was a formal portrait, stark and clear. She had pale skin, piercingly dark eyes that seemed to stare right through the camera and into the soul of whoever was looking, and long black hair that framed a face devoid of any expression. She was beautiful, but in a chilling, unnatural way, like a porcelain doll. Beneath the photo, a name was printed in neat block letters: Lara Vance. There was no other information, no clubs listed, no quote, just the name, and that haunting, empty stare. The friends were intrigued, their boredom replaced by a burgeoning obsession. Driven by this new mystery, they began their investigation. They scoured the school's official records, cross-referencing every official yearbook from the late 70s. There was no student named Lara Vance ever enrolled. They asked the oldest teachers, the ones who had been at the school for decades. No one recognized the face or the name. It was as if she had been plucked from thin air and placed only in this one forgotten book. But the more they looked at her picture, the more she seemed to be looking back. One of the friends, a girl named Maya, swore that one evening, as she studied the photo alone in her room, she saw the girl's lips curl into the faintest, cruelest of smiles for just a second. She tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light, but a seed of real fear had been planted. The obsession began to take a darker turn. The friends started dreaming of her, not just dreaming, but sharing dreams. They would wake up and describe the same cold, sterile classroom, the same feeling of being watched by those dark, empty eyes. They started seeing her out of the corner of their eyes during the day, a flash of long black hair disappearing around a corner, a pale face reflected for a moment in a classroom window. Lara Vance was no longer just a picture in a book. She was an infection in their minds, a ghost in their shared consciousness. They argued amongst themselves, some wanting to burn the book and forget the whole thing, while others, led by Maya, felt an inexplicable pull, a need to understand who she was, to give a voice to her silence, believing it was a cry for help. That is the most common and fatal mistake. When a whisper comes from beyond, born of tragedy and silence, the living assume it is a plea for justice, for remembrance. You must understand, the dead do not think like us. Time erodes their humanity, their empathy, leaving behind only the core of what they were, amplified by eternity. A forgotten soul does not necessarily want to be found. A silent one does not necessarily want to speak. More often than not, what they desire is company. They are cold, and they are so very, very lonely. They will reach out with the lure of a mystery, a puzzle to be solved, but the prize for solving it is not truth. It is an invitation to join them in their silent, cold, and eternal prison, to become another forgotten photograph in a book no one was ever meant to open. Maya, against the pleas of her friends, took the yearbook home one night, determined to solve the mystery alone. She sat in her room, the book open on her desk, the portrait of Lara seeming to absorb the light from her lamp. She spoke to the picture, asking the girl's name, what had happened to her. The room grew cold, and the air crackled with a static charge. The pages of the yearbook began to flutter, as if in a strong wind, though the window was closed. They stopped on a blank page at the very back of the book. Maya watched, mesmerized and terrified, as a single dark, wet spot appeared in the center of the page. It was like ink, but it was too dark, too thick. It began to spread, slowly, deliberately, forming letters. It was not a message. It was a single word, her name. Maya, a scream, caught in Maya's throat. She tried to slam the book shut, but it was as if it were held open by an unseen force. The dark, blood-like ink of her name began to drip down the page, and as it did, she felt a profound, draining coldness spread through her own body, starting in her fingertips and moving up her arms. Her reflection in a darkened window began to change. Her own face seemed paler, her eyes darker, her expression melting away into a familiar, chilling emptiness. She was being overwritten, erased. The entity of Alara Vance wasn't a ghost seeking peace. She was a void, a psychic predator that had imprinted herself onto the book, waiting for a new host. She was never a student. She was something that fed on identity, luring in the curious, and then taking their place, leaving them as the new forgotten face in the photograph. The next day, Maya's friends found the yearbook sitting on a bench in the school courtyard. It was open to the science club page, but the photograph was different. The face was still pale, the hair still long and black, the eyes still hauntingly empty, but it was undeniably Maya's face. And beneath the picture, the name was no longer Alara Vance. It was now Maya Klein. They searched for her, called her, but her phone was disconnected. Her parents, when contacted, claimed to have no daughter and had never lived in that town. Every record of her existence, school files, social media, photographs in her friends' own phones, had been wiped clean, as if she had never been born. All that was left was that single chilling portrait in a book that should have stayed buried. The void had a new face, and it was hungry again. The darkness feeds on recognition, a like, a subscription. It is more than a click, it is a pact. You are acknowledging the shadows, and in turn, the shadows acknowledge you. They see you, sitting there in the dim light of your screen. They feel the warmth of your attention. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness, making these visions clearer, making the warnings more urgent. Join our congregation of watchers. Let the whispers know you are listening. It may be the only thing that teaches you how to recognize the real monsters when they extend an invitation, for they come in many forms: a key, a book, or as we shall see next, a script. Our third story unfolds under the hot, artificial sun of stage lights in the sacred and often haunted space of a high school auditorium. This is a place of powerful emotions, where teenagers pour their hearts out, pretending to be other people, but sometimes the masks they wear do not come off. The St. Michael's High Auditorium had a ghost, as most theaters do, a local legend about a student actress from the 1960s named Evelyn Pine. She was said to be a prodigious talent, set for stardom until the final dress rehearsal of the school's ambitious production of The Crimson Queen. During the play's climax, where her character was to be symbolically hanged, a piece of stage equipment malfunctioned catastrophically. The prop rope became horrifyingly real. Her death was swift, silent, and witnessed by the entire cast and crew. The play was never spoken of again. Decades later, a new, ambitious drama teacher, Mr. Albright, discovered the script for The Crimson Queen, locked away in a dusty file cabinet. He saw it not as a tragedy, but as a masterpiece of Gothic horror, too brilliant to remain buried. Ignoring the hushed warnings of the older staff and the nervous whispers of his students, he announced it would be the school's fall production. He called it a reclaiming art from tragedy. The students called it tempting fate. The lead role of the tormented queen, a character who slowly descends into madness and talks to spirits, was won by a quiet, intensely focused girl named Sarah. From the moment she first read the lines, she felt a strange connection to the character, a disturbing empathy for the Queen's sorrow and rage. It felt less like acting and more like remembering. As rehearsals began, strange things started to happen. Lights would flicker and die during key monologues from the Queen. Whispers would be heard from the empty seats in the darkened auditorium. Props would go missing, only to reappear in impossible places. The rest of the cast was on edge, but Sarah seemed to be thriving. Her performance was becoming more than just good. It was hypnotic. She was inhabiting the role of the Queen with a chilling authenticity, too authentic. During scenes of madness, her eyes would take on a wild, unfamiliar light, and she would say lines that were not in the script, lines that were more poetic, more cutting, more filled with a genuine ancient pain. Mr. Albright, blinded by his artistic ambition, praised her for her brilliant improvisation, not seeing the truth. The truth was that Sarah was no longer alone in her own mind. The spirit of Evelyn Pine, tethered to the auditorium by the trauma of her death and a fierce, possessive love for her final role, had been waiting. She had been a silent audience for decades. The play was a summoning ritual, and the script was her book of spells. Every time Sarah spoke the Queen's lines on that stage, she was opening a door, inviting Evelyn in. The ghost was not malicious, not at first. She was a teacher, a spectral coach, pouring her own talent, her own pain, her own soul into Sarah, perfecting the performance. But she was also a parasite, and she was beginning to merge with her new vessel. Sarah started having trouble distinguishing her own thoughts from the Queen's, from Evelyn's. And this is where everything changes for you. You must understand that a stage is a nexus, an altar. When an actor pours genuine emotion into a role, they are performing a type of magic, creating a temporary reality. But when that stage is stained with a real death, the lines between performance and reality become permanently blurred. The energy of that final, terrible moment lingers, waiting. It waits for a similar energy, a similar performance to feed on. Evelyn's spirit wasn't just haunting the auditorium, she was haunting the play itself. She was bound to the words, the scenes, the character she died playing, and she would not allow another actress to finish the performance. She wanted her final bow, and she would take it, one way or another. The night of the final dress rehearsal arrived, the anniversary of Evelyn's death. A palpable sense of dread had settled over the cast. Sarah arrived, looking pale and thin, with dark circles under her eyes, but she radiated a terrifying, feverish energy. When she stepped onto the stage in the Queen's crimson gown, she was no longer Sarah. The way she moved, the way she held her head, the fire in her eyes, it was Evelyn Pine, resurrected. The performance was flawless, horrifyingly so. The rest of the cast were no longer acting, they were reacting in genuine fear to the force of nature that was on stage with them. They reached the final scene. The climax, the hanging, the prop noose was lowered from the rafters, just as it had been all those years ago. Mr. Albright, finally seeing the monstrous reality of what he had unleashed, tried to stop the scene. He shouted from the wings, ordering the lights to be cut, but nothing happened. The tech crew stood frozen, their faces blank, watching the stage as if in a trance. Evelyn walked to the center of the stage, a look of serene, tragic triumph on her face. She took the noose and placed it around her own neck, her movements graceful and practiced. She then turned and looked directly out into the empty, darkened seats, as if seeing a full house that wasn't there. She spoke, but the voice that came out was not Sarah's. It was a different voice, an echo from the past, filled with chilling power. My reign is eternal. My end is my beginning. Inseri. Yugon. Then, before anyone could move, the rope pulled taut, the safety mechanisms, the quick-release hitches, all of it failed. The stage equipment, controlled by a will beyond mortal understanding, repeated its tragic history with perfect, cruel precision. The cast and crew could only watch in frozen horror as the scene from 1964 played out again. A perfect, terrible echo. They weren't watching a play anymore. They were witnessing a ghost's obsessive final performance, a spectral encore with a stolen body. The final curtain fell not to applause, but to the horrified screams of those who had finally understood the danger of resurrecting a story that should have remained dead and buried. The Crimson Queen had taken her bow, and she had taken Sarah with her. They closed the auditorium for good. After that, boarded it up, sealed it away like a tomb. But they say that if you press your ear to the heavy, chained doors on a cold October night, you can still hear her. You can hear the faint, ghostly sound of a single actress on a dark stage, delivering a flawless monologue, practicing her lines for an opening night that will never, ever come. She is trapped in her final scene, her greatest performance, an endless loop of tragic perfection. Albright lost his mind, spending the rest of his days in an institution, whispering about a queen whose crimson gown was not a costume, but a promise written in blood, a promise that art and death are eternal. Now imagine this. The words we speak have power. The roles we play, even in jest, can invite things to wear our skin as a costume. The fourth vision I offer is a chilling testament to this. A story not of a stage, but of a simple chalkboard and of a boy who drew a door to hell simply because he was lonely. His name was Thomas, and he was the kind of boy who is invisible. He was not bullied, not exactly. He was simply ignored, an absence in the crowded hallways, a ghost at a lunch table full of people. His loneliness was a physical ache, a cold hollowness in his chest. He spent his time in the forgotten corners of the school, primarily the old unused chemistry lab in the basement, a room full of dusty beakers and charts of elements that felt like a language of forgotten power. It was there he found the book, tucked inside a cabinet of obsolete textbooks. It was a small, leather-bound journal with no title. The pages were filled with strange diagrams, astronomical charts, and writings in a language he didn't recognize, though some of it looked like a bastardized form of Latin. He was about to put it back when a single page caught his eye. It was a drawing of a complex, seven-pointed star, surrounded by intricate symbols. Beneath it, in clear English, was a simple, chilling instruction. For a friend in the shadows, draw on slate, speak the name, pay the price. The name was a jumble of harsh, guttural consonants. Goloth. Thomas felt a tremor of fear, but it was quickly overshadowed by a desperate, burning curiosity. A friend, even one from the shadows, was better than no friend at all. For a week he practiced drawing the symbol on scraps of paper, his hand shaking. The design was complex, and it felt wrong to draw it, as if the lines themselves were resisting him. Finally, he decided to act. He stayed late one afternoon, hiding in the janitor's closet until the entire school was empty and silent, save for the hum of the emergency lights. He crept into his favorite empty classroom, the one with the vast slate chalkboard that covered the entire front wall. The air was still and heavy. With a stolen piece of chalk, he began to draw. The sound of the chalk scraping against the slate was deafening in the silence. It took him nearly an hour to replicate the symbol perfectly. It pulsed on the board with a strange internal energy, seeming darker than the slate around it. His heart pounding, he stood before his creation, took a deep breath, and spoke the name, Goloth. The word felt alien in his mouth, the syllables catching in his throat. At first nothing happened. A wave of foolishness washed over him. It was just a drawing in a dusty old book. He was alone, as always. But then, the chalk symbol on the board began to glow. A faint, sickly green light emanated from the lines, casting long, dancing shadows across the empty desks. The air in the room dropped in temperature, becoming instantly, bitingly cold. A low humming sound started, a vibration he could feel in his teeth, seeming to come from the chalkboard itself. The center of the seven-pointed star began to darken, not just turning black, but becoming a patch of utter, light-devouring void. From that patch of impossible darkness, something began to emerge. It was not a monster of horns and claws, but something far more terrifying. It was a shadow, but it was three-dimensional, a pillar of blackness that had depth and form, but no substance. It had no face, no features, but Thomas could feel its ancient, overwhelming intelligence focused entirely on him. A voice spoke, not through the air, but directly inside his head, a voice made of dry whispers and cracking ice. You called, you drew the sigil, you named the name. What is it you desire, little mortal? What is the price you are willing to pay? Thomas, frozen in a state of pure primal terror, could only stammer out the truth. A friend, he whispered. I don't want to be alone anymore. The shadow creature, Goloth, seemed to consider this. The humming intensified. A simple request, the voice in his head hissed, companionship for the forgotten. It can be arranged. I will be your friend. I will walk beside you. I will make them see you, but my presence requires sustenance. The price for my friendship is the attention of others, their fear, their sorrow, their notice. You will no longer be invisible, boy. You will be a beacon, and I will feed on the moths that fly to your flame. In his desperation, Thomas didn't understand. He didn't care. He just nodded, tears of relief and terror streaming down his face. Yes, he said. Anything. The shadow pulsed once, a wave of cold energy washing over him, and then it receded back into the chalkboard, the glowing green symbol fading until it was just chalk once more. The next day at school, everything was different. People noticed him. The jocks who usually looked right through him nodded in the hall. A girl he'd had a crush on for a year smiled at him. It was intoxicating. He wasn't alone. He had a secret. He had a friend, but he could feel Goloth's presence. A cold spot at the edge of his vision, a constant, low hum in his mind, and he began to notice other things. A boy who bumped into him in the hall tripped moments later, falling down a flight of stairs and breaking his arm. The teacher who gave him a detention for daydreaming got into a fender bender in the parking lot after school. Small misfortunes, accidents, all happening to people who had drawn attention to Thomas. He could feel a flicker of dark satisfaction from the shadow that followed him, a feeling of being fed. The incidents began to escalate. The attention he received turned from positive to fearful. Students started whispering about him, calling him a jinx. They still noticed him, but now they avoided him, their eyes wide with a superstitious dread. This only made Goloth stronger. The entity fed on this fear, this notoriety. It began to manifest more clearly, no longer just a cold spot, but a dark, man-shaped shadow he could see lingering behind him in reflections. It would whisper encouragement in his mind, urging him to lash out, to revel in the power it gave him. Thomas was no longer lonely, but he was more isolated than ever. trapped in a terrifying partnership he had willingly forged. He had his friend, but that friend was a monster, and it was turning his life into a waking nightmare. He tried to erase the symbol. He snuck back into the classroom one night with an eraser, but the chalk would not budge. It was as if it had been etched into the very molecules of the slate. He tried to paint over it, but the symbol would bleed through the fresh paint, glowing faintly in the dark. He was tethered to it. He had drawn the door, and now he was the doorkeeper. The price of his friendship was to be the vessel for a parasitic entity from a realm of shadows, a being that fed on the misery it created through him. His desperation had led him to trade one form of isolation for another, far more permanent and horrifying kind. The worst part was a dawning, soul-crushing realization. Goloth was not his friend, it was his owner. What the stars don't tell you openly is that desperation is a prayer, and there are things listening in the darkness that are happy to answer. They will grant your wish, but they will twist its meaning until the very thing you craved becomes the instrument of your torture. To be seen, to be heard, to be loved, these are the most human of desires, and they are the most potent bait for the entities that hunger for our world. They offer a shortcut to your heart's desire, but their paths lead only to their own realms, to a place where your soul becomes nothing more than a meal, an eternal source of nourishment for a being made of hunger and shadow. Be careful what you wish for, especially when you are whispering it into the darkness. You are never as alone as you think. Our fifth story takes us to a place of echoes and shimmering light, a place that is supposed to be one of joy and sport, but which can so easily become a watery grave. The school's swimming pool. Northgate High's pool had been closed for 15 years, chained up and abandoned after a student, a gifted but troubled girl named Alice, had drowned during a late-night, unsanctioned practice. The official story was that she'd slipped and hit her head, but rumors persisted. Rumors that she had been held under, that it was a prank gone horribly wrong by jealous teammates. The school, eager to bury the scandal, simply locked the doors and let the place fall into decay, hoping memory would decay with it. But water holds memory better than stone. After years of budget approvals and construction, the school decided to renovate and reopen the natatorium. The grand reopening was a major event. The water was a pristine, chlorinated blue. The new starting blocks gleamed under the bright fluorescent lights. Everything was new, clean, and modern, except for the cold. From the first day, swimmers complained of a strange, inexplicable cold in the deep end. Not just a patch of cool water, but a deep, bone-chilling cold that seemed to cling to them, to sap their strength. They would emerge from the lane shivering, their lips blue, even on the hottest days. Coaches dismissed it as a circulation problem, a quirk of the new filtration system, but the students knew it was something else. They could feel it, a presence in the water. The feeling of being watched was the next thing. Swimmers would be practicing their laps, their world reduced to the black line on the pool floor and the rhythm of their own breathing. When they would get the sudden, prickling sensation of eyes on them, they would stop, treading water, and scan the empty spectator stands, the vacant lifeguard chair. So there was never anyone there, but the feeling was undeniable. Then came the whispers, faint, distorted words that seemed to rise up with the bubbles of their own exhalations. They couldn't make out what was being said, but the sound was filled with a desperate, gurgling sorrow that was more terrifying than any threat. The swim team's morale plummeted. The bright, new facility had become a place of dread. One of the team captains, a boy named Ryan, who was a skeptic by nature, decided to put the rumors to rest. He stayed late one night, telling the coach he wanted to get in some extra practice. Alone in the vast, echoing natatorium, the place felt different. The silence was immense, broken only by the gentle lapping of the water against the sides of the pool. The air was thick and humid. He dove in. The water was shockingly cold, far colder than it should have been. He pushed through it, starting his laps, trying to focus on his form, to ignore the growing knot of fear in his stomach. As he swam over the deep end, he felt it, a touch, icy cold fingers brushing against his ankle. He yelled in shock, spinning around in the water. There was nothing, just the shimmering blue. But the truth is, he wasn't alone. The spirit of Alice, trapped by the injustice and terror of her death, had been awakened by the return of life to her watery tomb. Her loneliness over the long, silent years had curdled into a cold, desperate rage. She didn't want to hurt anyone, not really. She just wanted someone to stay. She wanted a friend to share the endless, silent, cold existence she was damned to. The cold spots were her presence. The feeling of being watched was her gaze from the bottom of the deep end. The whispers were her attempts to tell her story, distorted by the water that had filled her lungs. And the touch was an invitation to join her, to feel what she felt, to understand the true, paralyzing cold of a lonely death. Ryan, now thoroughly terrified, swam for the edge of the pool as fast as he could, but his limbs felt heavy, his muscles sluggish and unresponsive. The cold was spreading through him, a creeping numbness that was stealing his strength. He felt the touch again, stronger this time. It wasn't a brush, it was a grip. An impossibly strong, impossibly cold hand was wrapped around his ankle, pulling him down. He struggled, kicking wildly, but it was like fighting against an anchor. He was being dragged down into the deep end, into the heart of the soul-stealing cold. His lungs screamed for air, but all he could see was the distorted, wavering lights of the ceiling, getting farther and farther away. The pressure in his ears was immense. And then he saw her, shimmering in the water in front of him, her form composed of refracted light and shadow. The ghost of Alice. Her hair floated around her head like a dark halo. Her eyes were wide with a sorrow that was 100 fathoms deep. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out, only a stream of silent bubbles. She was not menacing. She looked pleading. She reached out a translucent hand, not to harm him, but to touch his face, to share her story, her cold, her loneliness, in the only way she knew how. Ryan felt his consciousness fading, the last of his air exploding from his lungs. This was how she died. The terror, the helplessness, the cold, and the crushing, unbearable loneliness of dying, while surrounded by the very element that was supposed to sustain life. Just as his vision began to tunnel to black, the grip on his ankle released. He was suddenly free. With the last ounce of his strength, he kicked for the surface, breaking through with a desperate, ragged gasp. He clawed his way to the side of the pool, hauling his trembling, frozen body out of the water. He lay on the cold tiles, coughing and shivering uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from the sheer, soul-shaking terror of what he had experienced. He had looked into the face of the pool's sorrow, and it had almost claimed him. He never swam in that pool again. He quit the team the next day. The story he told was dismissed as a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, but the other swimmers knew. They knew the truth. The pool remained open, but no one ever swam alone again. The deep end was roped off, declared to have a permanent filtration issue, but the swimmers knew what was really there. They could still feel her, a cold and lonely presence in the depths, forever practicing her laps, forever waiting for a teammate who would stay with her, forever trapped in the memory of the water. Water is a mirror, a conduit. It remembers the shape of everything that enters it. It remembers the splash, the struggle, the final, silent surrender. It holds on to the echoes of life and the cold, heavy weight of death. And sometimes, when you disturb that surface, you are not just breaking the water's tension, you are breaking a seal on a memory that has been waiting patiently for a chance to pull you under. The final bell is about to ring on our time together for tonight. The last lesson is always the most important. It is the one that ties all the others together, the one that you will carry with you out into the dark. Our final vision concerns the very end of a place. The demolition of a school is a violent act. It is the destruction of a vessel that has contained more life, more energy, more raw emotion than 100 houses. What happens to the echoes when their container is shattered? What happens to the ghosts when their home is turned to dust and rubble? A group of seniors at the now condemned Northgate High, the very same school with the haunted pool, decided they wanted to find out. They planned one last illegal farewell party on the night before the wrecking ball was due to arrive. They broke in easily, the school already a hollow shell of its former self, its windows boarded up, its hallways littered with the debris of a hasty departure. There were 6 of them, including Ryan, the former swimmer, who had been talked into coming by his friends, who thought his ghost story was just that, a story. They set up in the old gymnasium, their music echoing weirdly in the vast, empty space. For the first few hours, it was just a party. They drank, they laughed, they reminisced, their voices bouncing off the walls that held so many of their memories. But as the night wore on, a strange feeling began to settle over them. The school didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full, crowded, as if they were being watched by an unseen multitude. A dare, fueled by alcohol and bravado, was issued a final tour of the school's most haunted spots. First they went to the auditorium, long since sealed. They pried the boards from the doors and stepped into the pitch-black, dust-choked space. As they stood on the stage, their flashlight beams cutting through the gloom, they heard it. A single, clear female voice from the darkness, humming a sad, sweet tune. A cold draft swept across the stage, smelling of lavender and decay. They fled, their laughter now nervous and strained. They didn't see the faint, shimmering figure in a crimson dress that watched them go from the wings, a sad smile on her spectral face before she faded away. The performance was over, and the audience was leaving for the last time. Next, they descended into the basement, making their way to the old chemistry lab. The room was even colder and more menacing than they remembered, and on the great slate chalkboard, a 7-pointed star was faintly visible, glowing with a malevolent green light that seemed to pulse in time with their own frightened heartbeats. The air grew heavy, and a pillar of absolute shadow began to form in the center of the sigil. It didn't speak this time, it just watched them, its presence a crushing weight of ancient hunger. One of the girls screamed, and they scrambled back out into the hallway, the sound of dry, whispering laughter following them from the darkness of the lab. The entity was being released from its prison, and it was pleased. They made their way to the library, intending to go to the attic to find the creepy yearbooks another friend had told them about. But as they passed a row of shelves, a single leather-bound book fell to the floor, landing open. Their flashlights found it. It was open to a photo of a girl with hauntingly dark eyes. One of the seniors, a girl named Jess, looked closer. She gasped. The face in the picture, though pale and empty, was her own. Beneath it, the name Jessica Miller was printed in neat block letters. As she stared, she felt a wave of dizziness, a feeling of being erased. Her friends looked at her, and for a second, their faces held a flicker of confusion, as if they were struggling to remember who she was. They pulled her away, leaving the book on the floor, its open page seeming to absorb the light around it. Finally, they reached the locked-up natatorium. Ryan refused to go in, the traumatic memory still raw. The others, emboldened and now genuinely terrified, forced the doors. The pool was empty, a gaping concrete wound in the ground. The air was stale and cold. As they stood on the edge, looking into the darkness of the deep end, a sound made them all freeze. The slow, rhythmic jangle of keys. From the far end of the pool deck, a stooped, shadowy figure emerged. It was the silhouette of an old man, a custodian, and in his hand was a large ring of iron keys. He walked slowly, methodically, not towards them, but towards a single, unmarked door on the far wall they had never noticed before. He raised a tarnished brass key, and the whisper slithered through all of their minds at once. "The bell is about to ring. You must not let them in." That's when they understood. The demolition was not just tearing down a building, it was breaking the seals. It was shattering the cages. Every ghost, every entity, every psychic stain that had been contained within those walls was now being set free. The school itself, in its final moments, was releasing its secrets. The auditorium ghost, the chalkboard demon, the identity thief, the janitor's burden, the drowned girl, they were all converging, their energies bleeding into one another. The school wasn't just being haunted by individual spirits anymore. The entire building had become one massive, singular, haunted consciousness, its collective agony lashing out in its death throes. The seniors were not at a party. They were trapped inside a dying monster. The lights began to flicker violently, then died, plunging them into absolute darkness. The air filled with a cacophony of sounds. A girl humming, gurgling water, whispering laughter, the jangling of keys, and a ghostly school bell ringing over and over and over. Hands, both icy cold and burning hot, began to touch them in the dark. Shapes moved in the periphery. They screamed and ran, scattering through the pitch-black hallways. No longer a group, but 6 individuals lost in a maze of collapsing reality. They were given one final lesson from the school they had once called a second home. Some doors should never be opened, some stories should never be told, and some places are better off forgotten than destroyed. For when you tear down a prison, you don't destroy the inmates, you just set them free. Go now. The final bell has rung, and this lesson is over. But do not believe for a second that you are safe. You carry these visions with you now. These whispers are tangled in your own memories. The shadows of these halls will stretch and follow you home. Look closely at the places of your own past. Listen to their silences. They have stories they are dying to tell you. And when you feel that familiar chill, that feeling of being watched in an empty room, know that the lesson is not truly over. It has just begun. Until our next session, try to stay in the light.